Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, CIOs Perspectives, Driving Clinical Trial Innovation with a Unified Platform, presented by Medidata and PharmaLam. I'm Joe Keenan, contributing editor to Fierce Pharma, and I'll be your moderator. Our speakers today are Adam Louie, PhD Research Director at IDC, Bill Swavely, CIO at PharmaLam, and Rama Kandru, PhD and CIO at Medidata. You can read their full bios on the left side of your window by selecting the Speakers tab. Just a few technical notes before we begin. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Time permitting, we will follow the presentations with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen, and you can do that throughout the presentation. All right, I think that covers it. We're ready to begin. Alan, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So essentially what we're looking at is, in my topic today, in my few minutes, I'm going to be talking to the topic of digital transformation and its impact on eClinical. So clearly, as we look at it at IDC, which is one of the leading IT market research firm, digital is a key process transformation trend that's fundamentally changing the way that people are working in the industry going forward. As we look at it, we can break it into five different major pieces, and its impact as a result is across the entire ecosystem within the life sciences. Clearly, leadership needs to think differently. The way in which data is being worked and shared crosses different areas and works in different platforms and allows you to do things on your mobile, do things on your laptop, and also deal with information in ways that you really do it in terms of the way you work at home and ways in you do it in your private life as well as in the way in which you're doing it at work. From an information perspective, clearly we are embracing all of the data that's under our umbrella, things that can allow us to work smarter and act more efficiently. And this data in its same right is also looking at ways in which you can improve operational efficiency. And in doing so, you're now changing the nature of the workforce. If we think it within the framework of eClinical, in the last 10 years, we've really seen an ongoing transformation where, as I looked at in the past, EDC was emerging and beginning to take hold about 10 years ago, went very much mainstream, pretty much captured all of the addressable market. And then as that began to evolve, people thought beyond EDC to more comprehensive eClinical. Let's connect the CTMS systems. Let's connect drug safety. Let's look at ways in which all of this starts to work more fluidly and transparently across the ecosystem. In the last few years, with the advent of digital, we've now begun to expand that and begin to look at things really where we've now taken those same platforms and infused data in them such that we're now focusing on outcomes. How can we actually work smarter such that the data that's built into the processes can be leveraged on a more regular basis, allowing us to work more efficiently, pursue things where there are less opportunities for mistakes, and overall just try to increase the potential for success. At the same time, that also meant let's look at the ways in which we can identify concerns over drug safety and minimize those wherever possible in terms of potential for adverse events, and when we've identified something, that information gets expeditiously shared with all the key people that need to act on it, such that patients will not be harmed. And as I mentioned in the past, the whole notion of digital also has the potential to streamline that operational process across the entire ecosystem. So the goal at the end of the day is fundamentally to more effectively leverage and share data across the ecosystem as a foundational key success factor going forward. If we think about the life science ecosystem over the last several years, it's fundamentally changing. If you went back 10 or more years, everybody was pursuing big market blockbusters where you could make billions of dollars in revenue by addressing markets that were in the millions of patients or hundreds of thousands of patients who were taking drugs on a regular basis to essentially keep the disease in check and be able to allow them to live their normal lives. We've addressed most of those major diseases with a few major exceptions which have yet to be addressed. But for the most part, most of the new drugs being developed today that we're seeing on the market are really more targeted therapeutics. We're looking at drugs for cancer. We're looking at drugs for very specific diseases where in the past one might have said, well, there's lung cancer or breast cancer, and that's just one thing. Now we've realized that no, it isn't. It's actually could be several different diseases which are manifest based on specific differences in the way in which the disease has attacked the body. And as a result, we're attacking each of those diseases in different ways. And because of that, the number of patients available to be able to try to pursue new disease cures and new therapeutics in that space, they're shrinking. Because where in the past you might have had 100,000 patients for a lung cancer trial, now because of segmentation, that's down to 50 or 25 or even 10,000. At the same time, though, we've got lots and lots of new data that we're beginning to be able to leverage in terms of trying to work smarter. Think about electronic medical records. Look at other real-world evidence data. Look at the scripts data coming out of organizations like IMS Health. And in those cases, that data can help you to work smarter, realizing that we do have knowledge about how particular existently approved therapeutics work in the current market, and as we modify those to address future approaches to medical treatments, we can actually begin to use the data that we've had in the past. You know, the classic way of using it in the past for clinical trials is that you have those sites that were able to effectively recruit for you, and then there were a few that really didn't. And so the fact that you know ahead of time that there's a site that's not going to be an effective recruiting opportunity means that you should basically think about those as a second plan versus a first plan, because they're not very effective. As we look at the platform supporting this, really, historically, those people created a foundational plan, or platform, they customized it such that it was perfect for them, and that then resulted in platforms that really couldn't be effectively updated. And with current issues around regulatory compliance, looking at ways in which we're trying to share information, ad hoc legacy clinical platforms are really having a hard time to keep up. And so as a result, we've shifted to things like platform as a service and ways in which we can enable organizations to keep up with things without having to take on those responsibilities themselves, which at its roots are not their own core competency. So the goal at the end of the day, as we think about this, is really transparent. We want the platform to be underneath everything, and you don't need to worry about it. You need to just simply concern yourself with the therapeutic issue that you have at hand, the patients that are going to be supporting that, and the ability to collect data to help you to move forward. As a result, this basically falls under the notion of transparent, agile, recognizing that the trials, the new types of trials that are coming into play can be different, again, than we've had in the past. We're looking at virtual trials. We're looking at multi-arm trials. We're looking at trials where essentially the patient may or may not have to show up at the doctor's office or at the investigator's office, and you have the ability to outreach to them directly. We're looking at new kinds of data that's coming in directly from patients, and the use of sensors and IoT and other wearable technologies which can now bring new types of data into studies. At the end of the day, that interconnectivity is still going to be key. We need to make sure that this is all unified such that data gets shared across the ecosystem. Because of the nature of trials, it needs to be scalable, it needs to be geographically independent. It needs to allow you to basically do trials from all over the world at the same time and still maintain full regulatory compliance. And finally, in my last slide, basically, this is my takeaway from it. You know, the 5 points that I've just raised essentially are those same key takeaways. Transparency, data should be fluid across the ecosystem, it should be seamlessly connected, and it should have intelligence built into it such that you can now go forward without having to be concerned over regulatory compliance concerns that you may not individually be aware of, but we are aware of in general and has been built in as a backstop to the system that says, oh, don't do that because that could get you in trouble. Secondly, again, agility allows for allowing these involving clinical trial models to succeed. You know, we're now beginning to see trials where multiple drugs are being looked at in the course of a trial to try to look at a spectrum of approaches to particularly tough therapeutic areas. You know, the uniformity of platform does allow for this foundation to be strong and interconnected and fully regulatory compliant in ways that will never get you in trouble. Clearly, again, as I mentioned, scalability. If we think about the amount of data that's into play, we're growing data at this point at 4x Moore's Law. There is so much data out there, you can't stay on top of it with existing methodologies. So you need to think about how you can work smart with these new data, the new data volumes, things like genomics, looking at various analytics, eventually AI technologies, and then again, increasing complexity in trials. And that complexity means there are increasingly complex inclusion-exclusion criteria. There may be interesting insights that can be gained using AI technologies. We're not there yet, but those technologies that might determine that, yes, you've reached your benchmark, and you may be able to advance forward based on that. And then as we look at this global market, finally, global regulatory compliance is always going to be a major concern of the industry, and that compliance is continuing to evolve because each country is sort of modifying their own rules, and being able to keep with that is always going to be a difficult task. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it forward to Bill.
Thank you, Alan. And I am. Can you hear me all right? Hello?
Yep.
Well, thank you, Alan, and a warm welcome to all our participants today. Thank you for joining. So I do appreciate Alan's setup. I think a lot of the things he just mentioned are poignant and will carry forward into my slides as I talk a little bit about the journey that Pharmalam, a mid-sized CRO, went through to look at the market and end up selecting the platform produced by Medidata. So, moving on to my first slide, it's obvious today that CIOs in the digital space are forced with all sorts of challenges. In fact, today I would say that the I in CIO really stands for innovation, because the expectation is that CIOs today are bringing innovative new technologies, new forms of revenue, new ways to save money and be compliant with regulatory pressures, et cetera, today, but still move the company forward. So a big part of digital transformation is looking at how do you get a company from point A to point B while still being fiduciary with the company funds, managing the risk and disruption of the company, and doing it with agility. Because at the end of the day, everything has to be done as agile as possible, since technology is the great differentiator in our space. And everybody has access to technologies and capabilities today, but how you apply those technologies and the way you move quickly to get to finished is going to make a difference in how your company grows in our space today. We have multiple systems today that inform the business intelligence and operational excellence of the companies, and figuring out how to harness all this data. As Alan said, data today is the new gold. It's the new currency by which we today take our companies, we take our processes, and we're able to channel that information to inform operations and finance and all the other components of the company to move us forward. The regulatory compliance environment is greater than ever, with big pressures in privacy, regulatory cybersecurity, and then you have the alphabet soup of everything from NIST to HIPAA to FIPS to FISMA. And I would say in our life sciences space, it's probably more of a challenge than even traditional technology companies. So specifically to Pharmalam, Pharmalam is a 25-year-old mid-sized CRO, and as such, kind of grew up with what I would say are systems that did not talk to each other, were very siloed, a lot of compensation required by creating spreadsheets and trackers and capabilities outside of what would be a normal technology environment for a CRO. This is a great, we had great people, great processes. Our sponsors love us and our global footprint, but our ability to be scalable, to be agile, to be adaptable was challenged and hampered by just the lack of communication and freeing the data in order to inform the business. And so, while we're looking at all of this, we had new expectations, new ownership from private equity and investors who are looking at us to grow the company as fast as possible, delight our customers, and move forward. But as I said in the last slide, how do you do this and still, minimizing risk and disruption to the business, but get us moving forward, especially knowing that no company has infinite funds, and all of our departments simultaneously were upgrading our capabilities and doing a transformation of this awesome mid-sized CRO. So when you think about it, there's really a few ways you get there from here, right? And most of these are probably pretty obvious to the participants, but you know, a lot of companies today spend a lot of time integrating a bunch of disparate systems, a bunch of software development, middleware applets, service bus architectures, and all those wonderful things that can become points of failure in your organization. They can also be very challenging to keep your systems current and upgradable. They sometimes hamper that agility and flexibility of the company, but it is one way to go there. You can build your own systems or augment systems with software development. You know, having led pretty large onshore and offshore software development teams and having built some compliant clinical clouds in my past, you know, it's definitely an option, but as a mid-sized CRO, we really don't want to be in the business of creating software. It's a challenge when you're trying to grow the business and do all the other things to move the company forward. So we kind of struck out and we did a pretty thorough due diligence of all the major players in the e-clinical space. This was a partnership with our operations team, our business development teams, our compliance teams, and our finance teams to really look at, you know, how do we leverage our great people, our great processes, our reputation in the market, but do that with somebody who can make a difference and really be disruptive in our little market here. So what we decided to do was think a little differently, and that's when we met the Medidata team. So, you know, why, with all the players out there and options out there, why did we end up with Medidata? So one of the things that was a big point of resonance for me when I was looking at players and looking at options of how you get all these disparate systems to talk to each other was seeing how far along and how mature Medidata had in this model of having a unified data store. Their Medidata Enterprise Data Store, or MEDS for short, is truly a differentiator in the space because instead of coupling together a bunch of systems with different front ends or having data buses behind the scenes that kind of shuffle data around, Medidata truly is creating this holistic unified data platform where all of the modules that we're familiar with, the alphabet soup of EDC, CTMS, ETMF, et cetera, are really presentation layers, just different views of a common data set. And instead of integration, we truly have unification. This also creates a lot of other agility opportunities for us. One, it's a great way to break down silos, make the system more collaborative, and really free the data. Because what happens is when I look at this architecture, even though we have a little component that we call CTMS, this entire clinical cloud becomes, for my organization, a holistic clinical trial management system and allows us to do some things with business intelligence and capabilities beyond just coupling systems and having data swap between different platforms. Another key portion of this is the ability to really make life easy for our employees and really delight our customers at the end of the day. We want our systems and our experience for our sponsors to be easy. We all know great experiences when we're out there on the internet. I always make the joke that my mother-in-law is awesome at buying stuff from Amazon.com. Because Amazon made the experience really, really easy for everyone to use. And that's kind of the philosophy we like to use when we look at putting forth customer-facing and employee-facing portals and systems to really delight them and make it easy for them to use. And then a big piece of being able to do this eClinical Cloud is because Medidata is continually innovating and putting a lot of their resources into R&D and moving the ball forward, we're future-proofed. So instead of waiting for developers to create a middleware applet that connects two different disparate systems on a service bus architecture, I'll take a breath there because we all know what that's like. I have a future-proofed, continually innovative system that as we progress in our relationship with Medidata, we just continue to consume innovation and create a great system here. So essentially, in a short amount of time, I'm able to take a company that was reliant on spreadsheets and systems that were somewhat second or third tier and really bring the company into the capability of not only freeing data, but allow it to use advanced algorithms, artificial intelligence, machine learning across medical monitoring and other capabilities that would have taken years to do if we had gone any other path. And at the end of the day, we do this because we want, again, to delight our sponsors, make our customers' life easy to work with us. And you know, there's some amazing things that happen when you couple two companies with experienced, knowledgeable, and people who subscribe to excellence, and that's Pharmalam and Medidata. We're able to really work together to kind of lift up the experience across the board and allow more patients access to more therapies through a much more agile platform and capability. We have so many anecdotal ways that these processes are going to improve, and I've only got a couple up here in my slides, but we're going to continue to see more and more operational efficiencies as we add more of these innovative technologies to the platform. The reducing SAE processing reduced by 30% due to Rave Safety Gateway. Well, what that means is instead of having manual processes to adjudicate safety information with our PVG system, we're able to do that all electronically, all the way through to our PVG system, which is also electronically connected to the FDA and European agencies. What this actually means for our sponsors is we can get your therapy to market faster because our FDA adjudication is going to be a lot smoother and a lot more seamless. All around, the technology opportunities that we're seeing in this process have just made it, like the things we knew we were going to do are evident, but then there's all these other side pieces and synergies that we're seeing because of a unified data platform and the ability to share that data. So let me go on to my next. So my final slide here is when you look at this clinical cloud, you see a lot of components and a lot of modules. The best part is we have access to all of this at Pharmalam, and this means we're able to provide these services and systems to all of our customer base, to our sponsors, and really create some unique ways of doing business and offer some capabilities that we definitely couldn't a couple of years ago, but more importantly, that competitively we're able to do in a way that a lot of people can't. We are the first CRO to fully adopt the Medidata Clinical Cloud, which has really been an exciting time for us. And I think that I'll leave you when you look at this slide. The biggest part of it is, even though you see these different modules, you see all this honeycomb of eClinical pieces and parts. It's really one system. It's one giant clinical trial management system. And that means that we're able to slice and dice data 10 ways till Tuesday. It truly does transform our study execution capability, and we do that through agility. So, I'm really excited about where we are here, and we're just getting started. So at that point, I am going to turn this over to Rama.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Alan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone who's joining this webinar. I'm truly excited, and I want to highlight to you why Medidata. So whenever I walk into Medidata offices in the morning, I see this slogan called Accelerating Hope for Patients. And our mission is powering smarter treatments and healthier people. So whether you're joining from a pharma company or from a CRO or someone in a patient advocacy group on this webinar, welcome. We all have a single mission, which is to change the outcomes for our patients. And how you do it is something that we're going to talk about as a unified platform. As Alan alluded to, he talked about these essential guiding principles that we all have to adhere to address the compelling needs of the marketplace. So transparency of shared data, he talked about that. He talked about agility in e-clinical platforms, a unified platform for fluid and transparent data management, scalable infrastructure and addressing the globally regulated compliance network. And, essentially this is a very complex ecosystem that we are driving efficiencies and accelerations for our eventual mission, which is to accelerate hope for our patients. And Bill talked about, digital transformation, which is really close to my heart. I've served as a CIO in pharmaceutical companies as well as med device companies. And digital transformation means different things to different people. Hopefully, what I can ground you on is our interpretation of what digital transformation means in the next slides. Bill also talked about, expectations for us to grow our return on investments when we accelerate our clinical trials. Cybersecurity is becoming a big threat. Patient-level data and access to patient-level data and protecting patient-level data in a way that we can, meaningfully address the challenges ahead of us while taking enough strength in our systems to protect this data set. It becomes of paramount importance. And, as we think through all of this, everywhere you look, there is tremendous amount of interconnectivity between systems, and very many platforms are pulled together, and I think Bill really nicely alluded to that folks are putting together these systems with somewhat of Band-Aid kind of a look of various vendors and technology folks creating these components, and hence we see multiple places where there are vulnerabilities, especially when it comes to patient-level data. And Bill also talked about agility, which I really love, which is to really move fast in an ecosystem to accelerate clinical trials. Just imagine the power if you can accelerate a clinical trial for non-small cell lung cancer by 3 months. It is giving 3 months of additional time for your drug to be effective on the market. So that's what it means. That it means tremendous value for our patients. So with that, one of the compounding issues that we all see is really about these data silos. And I want to highlight to you a bit of what digital transformation is and how we can actually help and use digital transformation that's happening in multiple industries and bring it to our own pharma med device industry. So according to the way we define digital transformation is really 3 things. One is systems that are built to partner in an ecosystem of components that are built by everybody else. And we believe that there's tremendous amount of innovation that's happening external to the doors of Medidata. And how do you leverage this innovation and build on top of it our own innovation to create an ecosystem that can be built to partner? Think of hybrid cloud, Internet of Things, device connectivity in medical devices. So that's the first pillar of digital transformation. Second, what I call is trusted knowledge or a data ecosystem. Just remember that I didn't call big data. I called it trusted knowledge. In our industry, it becomes very important that we actually talk about the data that we can trust, the data we can secure, the data we can provide meaningful value for our customers. Using technologies such as natural language processing, semantics, graph technologies, artificial intelligence to drive outcomes and insights for this data is the second pillar of digital transformation. The third pillar of digital transformation is what I call integrated experience. If you are that patient, what do you see? How do you perceive a pharma company? How do you perceive a med device company? How do you perceive a CRO? How do you perceive a hospital? How do you perceive a site? Sometimes a site is an individual who's actually working with an application. So these are the kinds of things that we are thinking very closely about what is that integrated experience that you can provide to the end customer. And essentially when you're thinking about digital transformation, the key big hurdle is this liquidity problem with data. Just ask yourself in your own company, how many silos of data that you've created? And in fact, in some of the companies that I worked, we tried to create a data lake. Then eventually it became 52 data lakes, then 100 data lakes. Again, it's a siloed ecosystem that we really need to, think of bringing them together. So, what I want us to think of is really that outcomes. How do you create novel therapies and impact to patients? How do you drive scientific discoveries and innovation powered by data, leading to the next generation of revolution, which is precision medicine? At a recent panel in precision medicine, I asked 235 executives from various pharma and med device companies, how many of them are thinking about technology for precision medicine? Just 2 hands came up. It's not enough. I think what we are doing in Medidata is we are actually proactively thinking of how do you create the system for next generation of precision medicine? How do you drive that personalized integrated experience for patient? And we're also thinking of how do you accelerate go, no-go decisions across your ecosystem? Disease biomarkers. How do you understand biomarkers and the cohorts of patients with specific biomarkers that are disease causing or even disease curing? What are the pathways or patient journeys that folks follow? Eventually creating a development paradigm that accelerates hope, but also accelerates outcomes for patients. So if you think of our own industry, we have various data sets, structured, unstructured, voice, video, image. How do you bring these sorts of various forms of data that are stuck in different formats? So let's take, for example, our real-world evidence data, which is in OMOP format. If you take our clinical data, it's in CDISC format or SDTM format. If you take, for example, our safety data, it's in MEDRA and WHO drug format. So there are very many different ways that we deal with data and the data models. And we at Medidata are thinking of this data ecosystem holistically and trying to solve problems for us. So in that light, I want to go to the next slide, which is just to give you, Medidata has evolved over 20 years, last 20 years, and we collect a lot of information. And just to give you an example, across Medidata, we serve close to every hour across 5,000 active trials that are running on Medidata. We serve over 1 million plus requests, 1 million plus. It's a very complex ecosystem. We have over 7.5 thousand user concurrent sessions asking, requesting, inputting data into the system. And, I just want to throw one more number at you. We collect over 45,000 images, DICOM images, patient-specific DICOM images. And in all, we have over 1.5 billion images across the platform that we manage. Can you imagine with the recent studies from Google and others that with 20,000 images, you can drive an artificial intelligence algorithm that creates disease-specific differentiation and interpretation even better than radiologists? Just imagine what we can do with this 1.5 billion images. So really, with this level of data that's in our systems and collecting more, as Bill said, we are growing at 4 times the speed of Moore's law. What we can do to drive precision medicine, drive our study success, accelerating our study success, better no-go decisions, go-no-go decisions across phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 for clinical acceleration. How do you shrink database lock to submission by 2 days, 10 months? These are all the things that can be accelerated using technology. And we are not only talking about it, we are actually putting tremendous amount of resources in hundreds of people working towards creating, delivering these unified platforms across the entire ecosystem. So the future of medicine and patient experience really is here. It's now. It's now and it's here. And I want to talk about this from this holistic view of what we call the operating system for life sciences. Just imagine what has Apple been able to do in the recent past. The iOS enabled a lot of people to create seamlessly apps on top of this platform that gave you the personalized experience that you now all enjoy. And so we've actually gone to trademark this because we are creating the operating system for life sciences, where interoperability of data, making data liquid across research, clinical, translational, real world, commercial, even supply chain and manufacturing, to bring all of these data sources together in a seamless way to drive outcomes in what we call disease-specific integrated patient experience. So the future of medicine and patient experience platform is here. You all know our Rave clinical platform. Recently, we have also acquired Shift, which has over 300 plus adapters to connect with real-world evidence data. If you're a pharma company or a med device company, you probably are already working with tremendous amount of patient-specific data sets in the millions. And there are multiple learnings from this data set that we can integrate into one ecosystem. And that's part of our Shift platform. We're bringing all of this to our recent launch of Acon AI, really taking large amounts of data, using the next generation cutting edge platforms and algorithms. How do you drive value for our patients becomes extremely key. And in light of Acon AI, we have actually created tremendous amount of artificial intelligence algorithms that can actually identify sites better, identify the patients who might have serious adverse events using, recursive neural networks. So very many examples that I can actually provide to you that we are doing right now that uses artificial intelligence to drive our unified platform. So what is it that we are trying to do? And, this morning I wanted to share with you, my son just walked over to Alexa and just said, "Hey, Alexa, what's the weather like?" And immediately it came up with, the weather in your area, very personalized recommendation. He didn't ask me, he asked Alexa, right? Just imagine a future tomorrow that you're actually talking to a device where you say, "Hey, how does my patient recruitment look like? What are my key attributes for this site? Do I anticipate any corrective actions from this site?" So these are the kinds of questions you should be able to ask. And guess what? There's tremendous amount of digital transformation in other industries that have happened that we can leverage. So we are actually creating the first one and only Medidata knowledge graph, what we call the operating system for life sciences. This knowledge graph, based on semantics, entity extraction, derived using multiple ontologies across the whole life cycle of pharma and med devices, provides us a single sense of truth, but also gives us the ability to go across various disease pathways and disease phenotypes to understand the eventual outcome for a patient. So, we are creating the first meta and master data that can take us across research, translational, clinical, and commercial. That makes data integration and mapping fairly easy. And this will also drive quite a bit of our next generation machine learning and artificial intelligence, and creates a system that's extremely flexible in creating this knowledge graph. So what does the platform look like, and what do we want to drive here? If you look at the Medidata platform, I think Bill talked about Med. There's tremendous amount of plug-and-play components that we have created across the entire platform. So I've come from 20 years of industry experience, and if I was creating one at a big pharma company or med device company, for data ingestion, we would be using 2 or 3 vendors. For data orchestration, a couple of other vendors. For semantic layer, maybe we would use a couple of other vendors. For visualization, and 3 or 4 vendors. This is a system that's put together, stitched up from multiple different platform technologies and giving rise to multiple points of failure. And so at Medidata, we said no more. We're going to create end-to-end a single platform that serves as a platform for life sciences. So on the left, you can look at ingestion, so whether it's operational data, EDC data, labs, imaging, sensors, electronic patient-reported outcomes. All of this data is seamlessly ingested using a MEDS ingester, so you don't have to go to a third-party tool. We have over 100 APIs to connect to this ecosystem after it's ingested, and user interface is augmented by seamless connectivity across the entire platform. So whether you are consuming Rave, or whether you're consuming CTMS, or ePro, or eCOA, or patient-specific tools, all of these are plug-and-play components into this master enterprise data store. So again, what I do want to bring together is this notion of technology stack to drive future growth. Essentially, if you're a pharma company, you should not be able to, pharma or med device company, you should not be able to worry about storage. Where is my data going? And do I have to pay more for AWS? Storage optimization and minimizing data duplication, becomes key. And we see this as being a big problem, that data is being passed around, it's stored in multiple areas, adding to cost and revenue. How do you compute across these various data sources? Workload separation from storage, compute, to microservices. I mean, these are all the parts of technology stack that one needs to be thinking about. And especially when you add more and more to this, like things such as API layer, microservices, containers, Kubernetes, you can imagine the complexity of a stack that you would be creating. So, and essentially, where do we want to go in the end? After all of this technology stack that's created, what are you more interested in? You're more interested in how do I provide outcomes for the patients, right? And so it is key that this platform is a plug-and-play ecosystem that connects from all the way from data ingestion, augmentation, analytics, and machine learning to action, insights, driving outcomes for patients. So Medidata has a unified approach to unlock data across the entire value stream. And I just want to give you some very specific examples here, just so you know how the platform is being used. So, often I heard in neuroscience, as an example, almost 37% of the clinical trials have to amend their protocol even before they recruit a single patient. So patient recruitment is a big issue. So we would have to solve for patient recruitment. Having the ability to connect to real-world evidence data where we know exactly millions and millions of patients are, and having a deep understanding of a site. In Medidata, we have in-depth understanding of site performance for 660,000 sites. And so leveraging all of that to optimize your design, accelerate enrollment, and manage performance and submission are exceptionally key. So what I would what I would want to do is understand probability of success. Where am I making my big bets for each of these compounds? As you all know, that the next generation of innovation is coming in oncology clinical trials. More and more combination clinical trials are becoming a norm. And hence, big sponsors, small companies are making bets whether to see what is the probability of success for a compound. How do I accelerate a particular compound? How do I accelerate value? So in this ecosystem, improving speed, success, quality of trials is exceptionally important. So with that, I want to go to the last slide, which is the next generation of clinical trials are going to be siteless, somewhat virtual, teletrials, whatever you call it. This is really taking the site to a person. And even in this case, we are thinking about tools that are going to help us to drive that seamless integrated experience for that patient to drive outcomes. So here, our platform is really the one that is designed by patient. In fact, we have actually pulled a whole bunch of patients into a room and said, well, how would you like this experience to be? They've actually created this. And it was such a fun experience to In so many places, I'm the first one to admit, we haven't thought of so many things that they came up with. So this is really a patient and sensor cloud platform that plugs into meds that patients have designed for us. Yet it takes into consideration the compliance, the security, the ease of use, and everything else across the platform. So with that, I just want to say our unified platform is really there to serve everyone, creating seamless experience, accelerating trials, and really helping our patients bench to bedside. So thank you, everyone.
All right, Rama, thank you. We're ready to move on to the Q&A session. Just as a reminder to the audience, there's still time to submit questions by using the Q&A tab on the left side of your screen. We've got a lot of great questions already, and we'll try to get to as many as possible with the time that we have left. So the first question up is for you, Alan. And the question is, unified platforms have been adopted in multiple industries. Why has it taken pharma a little more time to adopt it, and why is it important for them today to adopt it? And the second part of the question is, how do you think regulators view united platforms?
Interesting question. So, as you think about what goes on in other industries, the processes are fairly well established, and the ways in which they're executed, it has been essentially has become fairly mature. So the creation of a unified platform appeared to be relatively straightforward. As you think about what goes on in the life science industry, and particularly around clinical trials, in many cases, if you're looking at unrelated trials, they are completely different from each other, which means being able to define processes that connect everything together isn't always the same. And at the same time, we're now looking at new types of trials, whether it be virtual trials or multi-arm trials or RBM trials. Those trials actually have different processes and different metrics and different things that connect them together. So as a result, these trials have not been always easy to connect because the key metrics that went from application to application weren't necessarily the same, or the qualifiers that essentially determined whether you could go forward were different. And so similarly, as you think about it from a regulatory compliance perspective, especially from a global perspective, if you think about the nature of data and patient information, in some cases, patient data needs to be kept within the country in which it is generated, which means that platforms need to accommodate multi-site data resources that may be spread all over the world. So this has made life much more complicated in terms of achieving a unified platform solution. In terms of the regulators' approach and regulators' insights into that, if you look at what was told to me many years ago, if you think about when you're doing a pivotal phase 2 or phase 3 trial, they only went to one of two platforms at the time. And the reason was because those trials were recognized, or those platforms were recognized as being sufficiently robust such that there were going to be no questions from regulators. And I believe in Medidata's creation of a solid unified platform that it has the support of regulators because of the robustness of the development effort and assurances that there aren't going to be any hiccups within the platform that could result in potentially harm to a patient. So I think in that regard, the movement towards unified platforms is fairly solid and moving forward.
Okay. Bill, this question's for you. You mentioned pretty quickly Medidata's eTMF. Can you dive into it a bit more about the benefits as it relates to content management on a unified platform?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, one of the powerful things we're learning by going through this process of adopting the platform is that we went because we wanted the synergy of all of the different modules working together to kind of create 1 + 1 = 5. But what we're finding too is that the independent capabilities of the different components, such as CTMS, eTMF, are really top shelf in the industry. And when I look specifically at eTMF, we have a very process-oriented and I would say a team of excellence at Pharmalon that runs our TMF process. And we actually had adopted, prior to Medidata, one of the industry-leading platforms for eTMF out there today. However, our team found some of it challenging, and they saw some things in that system that they wanted to improve. So when we looked at implementing eTMF jointly with Medidata, and we put forth some of the things that we knew would create better synergies and capabilities in our operational team, Medidata adopted a lot of that. And we've actually been audited by a few sponsors who have been blown away by our new eTMF capability that we've had. And quite frankly, I can stand here and say quite strongly that Medidata's eTMF offering is probably the strongest in the industry right now. And that's not coming from the IT guy, that's coming from the TMF and operations people on my team who are really happy with what we have. So, you know, and again, at the end of the day, this is all wrapped in a platform that when combined with CTMS, EDC, Safety Gateway, all these other components, then it's going to be more powerful as we pull portfolio level metrics and capabilities out of it in a system that's regulatory compliant and you know, more secure than what we could build on our own at Pharmalon. So great question. Thank you.
All right, Bill, thanks. Rama, this question's for you. The audience member asked if you could provide some examples of how Acorn, Shift, and Medidata can leverage the metadata knowledge graph in their products.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll take you to some very specific examples, and then you'll see. Look, when we took all the data from Medidata, we found that there are 40 different ways to how people describe headache. So, you know, semantically, everyone talks about headache in different ways, but yet everyone knows it's the same thing. And so here is where using semantics and knowledge graphs become exceptionally key to drive a unified view of what data presents. And so we have taken this approach of disease connectivity, you know, with the 5,000 different diseases, different ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes, different ways data is mapped. So we are developing this tremendous and have developed tremendous knowledge graph, which we call the Medidata knowledge graph, to drive efficiencies. And I'll give you one example. So someone was looking for, hey, do you have patients in your system that have a specific disease biomarker that could have a different response rate in a clinical trial? You know, I want to keep the name of the sponsor somewhat discreet and the disease type a little discreet, but how would you go about searching a database with millions of patients and billions of data points with various descriptions that we all follow that are different and unique to identify a cohort of patients across this database that have that specific biomarker? And in this case, it happens to be EGFR exon 20 mutation. There isn't a query that you can write in the database. However, semantics can actually solve this problem for you. That's how semantics work. And so you have seamless connectivity of different terms and how those terms relate to each other. Not only we were able to pull the specific patient populations, we were able to connect it to various publications on this, various patents on this, various clinical documents that are out there, both structured and unstructured, give them a very comprehensive view. And in this case, the sponsor was quite, you know, excited to see that the response rate in this specific subtype of patients is much more than the general broad population cohort within a clinical trial. That meant that they could actually recruit patients with this biomarker, right? Tremendous value for the sponsor, tremendous value for the CRO group, tremendous value for the patients eventually. So the second example that I can give you is for example, serious adverse events. You know, we are using term-based recursive neural networks. You know, you're using artificial intelligence models to predict who gets serious adverse events using some of the data that we have. And so instead of having each of the serious adverse events be reviewed by a doctor as part of a trial, we can actually give some specific recommendations using artificial intelligence, right? And as we explore this sort of Acorn AI kind of view of putting real-world evidence data next to clinical data, you can see very many synergies. For example, if you're looking at a site you want to select for a clinical trial, I can actually look in real-world evidence how many patients are near that site. Is it oversubscribed? What is the site burden? What is the investigator burden? All based on seamless connectivity between real-world and clinical data. The other one I'm truly excited about is really all about integrating this information, clinical and real-world information with genomics and proteomics and transcriptomics, where most of our biomarkers for a disease are. However, the outcomes are all in clinical and real-world evidence systems. Seamless connectivity using semantics and AI to drive forward outcomes is key. So that's what we are trying to do, some specific examples. But specifically, if you are in a clinical trial group, we can at this point provide you a list of sites for a specific indication that might accelerate your clinical trial, all based on semantics and AI. And that is running right now, and multiple sponsors are leveraging those solutions from Medidata coming to a unified platform.
Rama, could you briefly talk about the training programs provided by Medidata?
Yeah, so thank you. It's a great question. So we have a whole lot of places that you can actually train using Medidata. So some folks might want light touch, which is go to medidata.com. We have a tremendous amount of information on each of our products, and we write quite a bit of white papers. They're all posted on medidata.com. Second is our product team is doing quite a bit of training, both in person, wherever you're located, you can ask for one. The third is we have our own training rooms where lots of our CRO partners and sponsors take advantage of. They send their teams to be trained on each individual product. In the end, it's really, if you are interested in the training program, just shoot us a note, or even better, shoot me a note. I'll make sure you get all the things that you need.
All right, Bill, this question's for you. How has your IT organization changed since you adopted Medidata's platform?
Another great question. So I would say that the ability of my IT organization to be agile and to provide solutions tailored to the needs of our operations, sales, and finance team has been stepped up, because instead of building applications or putting additional pieces in to enable and inform data, we're able to use a lot of the platform capabilities today, and in some cases, looking forward to new business intelligence capabilities of the platform as the capabilities and system grow. That's a big part. So I would say overall, our ability to be agile and deliver is huge. The second part, and probably one of the things that probably gets overlooked when we talk about this platform architecture is, and I briefly mentioned it, when you look at the amount of regulatory compliance that Medidata has had to build into the system in order to make it work across the global footprint, we have to cover all the privacy laws, whether it's California Consumer Protection Act or it's GDPR. Since Medidata does a lot of government work, it has to be NIST and FIPS 140 FISMA compliant. We have to be Part 11 compliant, and HIPAA and high-tech and all of that. And, again, for a mid-sized CRO to go and create that much cybersecurity capability and readiness at that level is a very costly proposition. And if I'm building my own or even creating integration points, those points have to be hard, and that's usually where the breakdown happens anyway, as we all know. I get all of that baked into the system. So I went forth looking for technology and an e-clinical solution to provide to our customers, but now I can tell our customer sponsors that you can trust that your data is going to be private, safe, and secure in this e-clinical cloud, because Medidata built it right, and they have the credentials and audits to prove that. And I think that's a big part of what really helps my IT department be agile and focus on the things that they need to. Thank you.
All right, Bill, thanks. Unfortunately, we only had time for that last question. We had a lot of great questions today. Couldn't get to them all, but we will try our best to get back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this Fierce Markets webinar and submitting so many great questions. I'd also like to thank our speakers for participating and Medidata and Pharmalon for presenting today's webinar. As a reminder, the webinar has been recorded, and you will be able to access the recording within 24 hours by using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.